Hello, my name is Christy, editor, beta reader, ghostwriter, and today I want to talk to you about storytelling tropes and why these aren't a replacement for an actual story. Enemies to lovers, one bed, touch her and die. Who hurt you? Found family, morally grey shadow daddy. I had to do some quality Googling to find out what that was, and I wasn't impressed. If you spend 5 minutes on romantasy marketing, you'll see these tropes listed like ingredients on a cereal box. A few days ago, I went to my local bookshop, and as always, I strolled towards the fantasy section, which is my favorite genre, along with science fiction. And I have to tell you, it was depressing. Pretty much all shiny, glossy volumes were advertising the same story beats using TikTok as a selling point and tropes as a marketing method. Eh, it's tiresome, to say the least. I am tired of the trend toward homogenization in literature, which just cashes in on short lived trends and leaves no room for creativity. Now, I don't want to sound like a salty old lady yelling at clouds, and there certainly was a lot of crap in the before times, but honestly, creativity is vanishing from these big releases. And let me be clear, none of these tropes are inherently bad. Some of them can be fantastic. So, why do so many modern fantasy novels feel hollow? Why do they feel assembled rather than authored by a person? Why do they feel, I don't know, algorithmic? I am not here to insult readers or to attack authors, but I want to explain a structural craft issue that I'm seeing over and over again. Because tropes are tools. It's not enough to glue a bunch of tropes together and call it a day. And when tools replace storytelling, the result feels mechanical, even when a human wrote every word. I am very much against throwing accusations of AI usage around, especially when some books are so tremendously terrible no machine could ever sink that low. I'm looking at you, Blood of Hercules. Yeah. So, first things first, what even is a trope? A trope is not a checklist item. It's not a marketing bullet point. A trope is not a personality. A trope is a narrative pattern, a shorthand that carries emotional expectations. Enemies to lovers works when there is friction, when there is ideological clash, escalating tension, transformation. Found family works when trust is earned, belonging is constructed, loyalty develops through shared risk. Who Hurt You, one of my least favorite things in the world, works because when done correctly, it signals empathy and protective instinct, vulnerability. But writers beware, the trope is not the scene. The trope is the emotional function of the scene. And that distinction is where things often start to fall apart. Now, in a lot of modern romantasy marketing, tropes are presented like a grid. Enemies to lovers, morally grey, touch her and die, and all that stuff. And I've read books where these are presented as a list. Like readers are too dumb to understand storytelling conventions by themselves, and I hate that so very, very much. And you guessed it, Blood of Hercules does this. Look at this bullshit. Bonds of Hercules, a dark romantasy, enemies to lovers, spicy romance novel inspired by Greek mythology, is the actual name of this sorry atrocity on Amazon, the sequel to Blood of Hercules. Man, I hate the first one so much, and this is just the icing on the cake. Look at that. It's so dumbed down. They aren't even trying anymore. This isn't about telling a story. It's not about writing the best book you possibly can. The only goal is to churn out easily marketable garbage that contains a list of tropes as a marketing gimmick, which are most often forced into the narrative just so the author and the publisher can claim it's there, all right? I honestly don't think people are even actually reading these books, like really reading them. They're skimming them to get to the so called tropes and the spice. And this honestly kind of spells doom for the quality of fantasy writing in general, especially writing directed at women. Because there are like three publishing houses in the whole world now, and they don't care about quality. It's about making as much money with as little effort as quickly as possible. And what happens, I think, is this: writers begin writing toward the trope instead of writing toward character and story and themes. Instead of asking, what does this person want? What are they afraid of? What would they never say out loud? How do they behave when no one's watching? All the characterization goodies. The question becomes, where can I insert this moment? And when that happens, the scene stops being organic. It exists because it's expected, because it's on a list. And that's when writing begins to feel assembled by a machine. That's when these things stop being stories and become nothing more than a product for consumption. I don't have to tell you that that's not that's not a good development. Let's talk about a specific example. Who hurt you, or who did this to you? It's the same thing. It can work under the right circumstances, especially when it's not specifically spelled out as a look here, I'm doing the trope thing, but when it's woven organically into the story. It usually appears in a moment where a character notices trauma, they are not the cause of it, and they are stepping into empathy. The function of this type of storytelling tool is to deepen intimacy and shift a relationship. I'm going to go back to my this done well example default, which is Stephen King's Dark Tower. In book two, two people from different points in time are pulled through a magic door by the protagonist, Roland of Gilead, into this post apocalyptic magic world. One of them is Eddie, a recovering drug addict who just lost his brother. The other one is Susanna, or rather, she starts out as Odetta and Detta, two warring personalities in the same body. Now, Odetta, the good personality, before she reconciles both parts of herself and becomes Susanna, is scared and upset, switching from one personality to the other all the time. She's confused, she doesn't understand what's really happening. And Eddie falls in love with Odetta, if not her evil twin, her mind twin, and he comforts her when she's upset. The scene in question has them lying in the darkness at a seemingly endless beach bordered by a monster filled ocean. And despite her confusion and fear, Eddie is the one who is hurt and needs comfort. He's crying, and she takes his hand. She distracts him, comforts him with tenderness and familiarity, and she starts reciting a poem that he also knows. Now, this is the quote: First star I see tonight. They spoke solemnly, in unison. Boy and girl for this now, not man and woman as they would be later. When the dark was full, and she called him to ask if he was asleep, and he said no, and she asked if he would hold her because she was cold. Wish I may, wish I might. They looked at each other, and he saw that tears were streaming down her cheeks. His own came again, and he let them fall in her sight. This was not a shame, but an inexpressible relief. The scene reveals something about each character and furthers their relationship, shifting it into familiarity and tenderness. It falls under the hurt slash comfort umbrella and is not a direct example of that who hurt you stuff, but that's because it furthers the story and characterization. That's what I mean when I say that tropes are a way to categorize storytelling conventions that readers recognize, not items off a list that must be included verbatim come hell or high water. Eddie and Susanna's relationship has many moments when she helps him deconstruct his complicated relationship with his brother Henry, who was a mess and a terrible influence and also emotionally abusive. That's the who hurt you part of the story. which is so seamlessly woven into the narrative. It's a theme that adds to the plot, but mostly to who Eddie is as a character, who Susanna is, and what their bond is like. It's connected to other themes of the story, such as dealing with addiction and trauma, deconstructing one's own flaws, and learning to overcome adversity. A trope needs to always be part of the story's fabric and to interconnect with everything else. The Dark Tower is a prime example of this. You don't have this one quotable scene where it's spelled out for people who aren't actually paying attention. It's a recognizable storytelling tool employed to further characterization and themes. That is good writing. As an aside, I just love the stream of consciousness of Eddie's thoughts here. I just love these characters, full stop. Okay, now here's where the trope collapses. When it's not woven into the narrative, but just a familiar beat that gets squeezed in there so it can be used for marketing. It's especially bad in so-called dark romantasy when the abuser says it and it's supposed to be intense and romantic or something equally absurd. I've seen this recently in multiple books, including Blood of Hercules and What Fury Brings, and yes, also in Alchemized. So let's talk about one of these scenes in Alchemized. I'm not going to talk about the whole book because I've only read a third so far. It's a slog. And I hate everything about it, from the writing style to the repetitiveness and the lack of character development. It's so far it's been a miserable experience. But I will reserve my judgment. That being said, there is a scene that jumped at me and that I hate with a burning passion. I have been jotting down increasingly angry notes whilst reading, and at some point I got to the bit where a cartoonishly evil side character attempts to assault the protagonist, a limp noodle of a character called Helena, who is nothing like Canon Hermione. I've taken screenshots, but will only read the quotes, so you can pause to read my reaction to them. Clever little bitch. He dragged her backwards a little farther and jerked her head to the side. A needle sank into her neck. That's on page 211. Then we've got on page 213, she turned, eyes dazed, and found Lancaster, that's the evil cartoon character, crumpled against the wall as Ferren, that's the Draco Malfoy clone, stood over him, kicking so violently that bones cracked each time. Now, I would ask you to pause and look at my notes that I took, because I'm not going to read those out loud. Okay, we have on page 215, I'm not going to hurt you, he said. Oh, no, he said that in a tense voice. So it's, I'm not going to hurt you, he said in a tense voice. He took her by the shoulders, turning her towards him. She knew he wouldn't. What, take her by the shoulders? No, hurt her. Well, that's bad. He only hurt her on certain days. Well, that's a relief. And this wasn't one of them, so she sat very still. Look at how repetitive this shit is. Oh, okay, that's a topic for another day. I have a lot to say about the quality of the writing in this book and how I don't think anyone edited this, but like I said, that's a topic for another day. Okay, so the scene is nothing but a setup for the fascist love interest, Draco clone. How far we've fallen. For him to look heroic while he rescues the damsel from a dude who's written to be so incredibly vile, the fascist love interest, because that's what he is, looks good by comparison. The assault is nothing more than a backdrop for the inevitable romance, because that's what this whole thing is about, by the way. And it's also trite and cliched and just tiresome. I know why this author did it, obviously, but it doesn't fit. Fascist love interest guy is a piece of shit of the highest magnitude. I honestly don't care what happens in the flashback section, I'm told, is part two, because in part one, he goes above and beyond to be a sneering, obnoxious, wannabe edgy, creepy, abusive dickbag. He didn't have to be a gigantic piece of shit, but he chooses to be. And the power dynamic is severely skewed. So, oh, and this book has no plot. I'm on page 262, and there has been no plot. There hasn't been any character development either, by the way. So if anyone wants to tell me that this is a character-driven story, well, it's not. It isn't. There are no characters. These aren't characters, and this is not a story. It's a pile of fanfiction cliches thrown together, and the scene wasn't just predictable, it's just there to further the romance without thinking about the implications. These are, much like the cardboard cutouts populating what Fury brings, just wish fulfillment instruments. And although the book meanders and nothing much happens for a million years, this shift from abusive, creepy sack of garbage to furious protector just happens out of the blue, and it feels so jarring. And please don't tell me that part two explains this. His frankly disgusting behavior this entire time cannot be contextualized. This comes out of nowhere, and it does not excuse anything that came before. It just doesn't. It's awful. I mean, the implications of such a scene under such circumstances have not been thought through. The fascist love interest is an abuser who is in a position of power over the protagonist that cannot be understated. I don't care if he's also being forced by the circumstances to be a collaborator, because honestly, I don't think he is, and I really don't care. This is a creepy and badly written and cliched cardboard character that is entirely based on fanon Draco Malfoy, not on canon Draco Malfoy. And I just hate that so much. This scene does nothing to develop character because nobody actually learns anything. Nobody changes. It's just the same shit over and over. And then this happens out of nowhere. And sorry, it's not well written. It's the exact opposite of what happens in the Dark Tower. Now, Trisha Levenseller did the same thing in What Fury Brings, just gender swapped, and it was just as bad, just as jarring and out of place, just as unconnected to actual emotional themes. It's just there to signal that the abuser and bully will in fact become the romantic partner at some point. That's what it's there for. It doesn't mean anything else. And if it's supposed to mean anything else, then the author did a very bad job at conveying this. And I don't think people are doing this on purpose, honestly. I think it's structural. The trope is being inserted because it's recognizable, not because it arises from character psychology or because it's part of a larger theme. The trope is shoved into these mediocre works because it's a high frequency emotional beat in the genre, because people expect it, because it's on a list. But it's not anchored in power dynamics, it's not part of any theme or character development, because in none of these books I've mentioned do the characters change after the scenes in question. Especially in Alchemized, they just keep meandering for a good long while. And in What Fury Brings, the scene is just there to explain to the audience that the abuser, a woman in this case, is not actually abusive at all. She's protective, see? But she never actually interrogates her behavior, her privilege, her role in upholding oppressive systems. Neither does the fascist love interest guy in Alchemized, Draco clone. Otherwise, I would not have spent over 200 pages reading about him being a murderous, creepy fuckwit. You know who does change as he shares vulnerability with another human being? Eddie Dean in The Dark Tower, because he's an actual character in a book with a plot and with themes. I want to be very clear. If you enjoy these books, I'm not attacking you. What we like to spend our time on does not say anything about us as people, our intelligence, our values, or anything. I don't believe that. We are all allowed to enjoy whatever we like. Everyone is allowed to have fun, and especially in this world, escapism is important, I think. I get angry at this because this is a craft issue. Tropes aren't bad, but when tropes replace character motivation, when they override power logic, when they contradict theme, they flatten the story. And I think readers deserve more than a flat story. And even escapist literature should be held to a higher standard and shouldn't be just squeezing in these storytelling beats because they're expected while ignoring the unfortunate implications that come with them. Now, before you use a trope, ask yourself, does this arise naturally from character psychology? Does it shift the power dynamic? Does it change the trajectory of the plot? Does it reinforce any theme? Would this scene still function if I removed the trope explicitly? If the answer is no, then the trope is decorative. And decorative storytelling is hollow, like the characters, who then only feel like devices plopped in an unconvincing world so that the author can live out a fantasy. Tropes are powerful, but they are shorthand, not story. When we treat them as checkboxes instead of tools, the result feels assembled, mechanical, empty. And fantasy of all genres deserves better. And it deserves characters who are more than vehicles for recognizable lines that I can put on a cover or that I can use for marketing on TikTok. I don't even know how that works because I'm old. What I'm saying is tropes are not the enemy, but trope stacking without integration is. It makes the story worse because you're not telling a story. You're just cramming in stuff that you can market because people expect to recognize it without actually paying attention. And that's not craft. I don't think it is. Okay, enough ranting. Anyway, this was a little different. I didn't do any line editing this time, but I needed to get this off my chest, and you can tell that large parts of this were not scripted. Some of it was, but not all of it. Because this has been bugging me as I've been toiling through Alchemized. My God, that book is so bad. I don't want to continue reading, but I like complaining on the internet, and I want to see what part two, the flashback section, brings, and whether it makes anything better. But even if I find out that the Draco clone is actually a great guy in that bit, he's been such an obnoxious sack of shit, so abusive, so creepy that nothing makes up for it, and nobody was forcing him to be like this. Nobody was watching, nobody was listening in. So no, no, no. Okay. I think we all deserve better. Readers deserve better than this. And writing is an art form, and we should treat it with respect. Thank you for listening to me complaining, and hopefully I'll see you around.